Okay, well, good morning, everybody. Good morning and welcome to this week's virtual plant clinic. This week, we have another special guest with us here. Well, first of all, we have Lily Browning, my co-host, who's always a special guest when she's able to join us. And this week, we have our multi-county livestock agent, Laura Bennett. So welcome, Laura.
Well, thank you.
I work together on some classes with Laura, and every time I get a question from all of you about pasture grass or animals or livestock, I really don't know anything about that kind of stuff. So it just gets sent straight to Laura. So thank you, Laura. I hope I don't blow up your email on a regular basis. Sending all that to you.
It's fine.
So Laura knows the answers to all those kind of things. But let me go ahead and we'll go ahead and jump right in here. And I do have just a very, very short presentation here. To kind of keep us on focus. Can everybody see that? Okay?
Yes.
Okay, this week's updates. I did get a question on Facebook just yesterday from Lynn, and she asked about us giving a class or giving her some information on identifying and combating creeping indigo. Please, she put please all in caps also. So I thought, well, this is just absolutely perfect because I really don't know a whole lot about creeping indigo and its effect on animals. I know there are, very important effects on them. So I was just going to throw this straight to Laura and let her talk a little bit about what creeping indigo is, how you can identify it, how you can control it, why it's bad. And of course, University of Florida has a whole bunch of different really good resources on that if you want to read more. So Laura, why don't you go ahead and jump in and tell us all about creeping indigo.
Okay, and Bill, I'm going to share my screen, if that's okay.
Sure. Let me go ahead and stop sharing there so you can go ahead and share and explain it a little bit better.
Okay, let me find my, there it is. See? And because I have pulled up a picture while I was talking to you.
Okay, great.
Let me go to the bottom. Shoot, there it is. That's the one I want to show you. Current slide. Okay, so can you see my creeping indigo picture?
Yes, I can.
Yes, and like Bill said, there is a really good IFAS document that I can share. I mean, and of course, Bill would have access to it as well. Everybody does, but it really goes through multiple pictures of what to look for. This pink kind of salmon colored flower is very telltale. And like the name suggests, it creeps real close to the ground. There's another forage species called hairy indigo that looks very similar, but it grows tall and upright. And that one is not poisonous. So I was actually on a herbicide program yesterday, and they talked about how the most poisonous aspect of the creeping indigo is actually the seed pods. So they found that the greatest concentration of that, the active ingredient that causes the problem is in the seed pods, which you'll be able to see them. There's not a picture of them on this plant, but they show up later. So my advice to most people, there are a couple of, luckily this is a broadleaf plant, so you have some ways to kill it without killing your grass. But one of the best ways to manage against getting this set up in a pasture is to keep your grass height at 4 to 6 inches. As soon as we start overgrazing, which can happen very easily with horses, the creeping indigo can kind of set up shop, because if your grass height is kept tall, it will shade out the creeping indigo and it won't set root, I guess you could say. And what people will mostly find, they'll first start finding it in their yard and around their barn, because they're mowing their yard frequently and the grass height is kept very low, and that's where it will show up first. So you'll likely find it first there before you'll find it in your pasture. And there are a few chemicals that you can use for a herbicide product to get rid of it. Because once you have it, you really don't want to keep it around. And always remember too, one thing I always tell people, because they get very fearful of these poisonous weeds, if you can keep your grass height such that the animals aren't made to eat something poisonous, they will typically avoid it if they can. They can live and exist with poisonous plants, and they may never consume them, but once their forage amount that's available to them gets low, then they will go toward those things they shouldn't. So a lot of pasture management is helpful, but also you may need a herbicide program. But those are the two ways to kind of take control of it. That's my general go-to advice on the weeds.
Okay, that makes perfect sense to me. Like I said, I'm definitely not an expert on livestock or pasture management. So I guess people could just look up online, University of Florida information.
Yes, or and I'll be happy to send. I can send you the link, or I can send you the actual document attachment if you would like to have it.
Yeah, go ahead and email that to me, and I'll go ahead and share that with the person on Facebook that asked about that.
Okay. Yeah, it's really good. Lots of pictures, a management plan, herbicide program. It's all in that one document specifically for this.
Yeah, I know a lot of outdoor problems and lawn and landscape problems. It's just a matter of management. Everybody calls us and they're looking for that one magical product they could buy at the store, and if they spray it, all their problems are solved, and it's never quite that easy.
Right.
I like the idea of keeping the pasture grass high, because that relates to our lawns as well. You know, the biggest problem is people mow their lawns too low. So mowing our pasture grasses at 3.5 to 4 inches also would shade out a lot of these weeds as well. But I'm sure in pastures, this is probably more of a problem in, well, some of the hobby pastures where they try to have, 5 horses on an acre as well.
Sure. Yes. Yeah, that tends to be, where it becomes more of a problem.
Right, because it's being overeaten. And also what I've heard from agricultural people too is if the animal, doesn't get to run or exercise or whatever, it gets bored, and then it finds some of these poisonous things just, out of boredom or something. So.
Well, and horses are kind of a special case because they are made, they're made such that they have to graze a lot, because they have to constantly have forage coming in, because it creates saliva production, it prevents ulcers and all those things. So they eat and consume a lot more forage than most animals do. So that actually, exacerbates the problem. So yeah. They're big eaters.
Does this relate to our pets, our dogs and stuff too?
I'm not sure. I've not seen any literature on the pet aspect. I usually on poisonous weeds with the livestock, they have to eat about 2 to 3% of their body weight on most of these to be real poisonous. Now, if they're eating just the seed pods, maybe less, but usually it's a quantity consumption that's the problem.
Well, since we're talking about poisonous weeds, and we'll talk about, in our aspect, we have a lot of people, where I'm going with this, who love the lantana. I mean, how do ranchers feel about that?
Well, and I'm not sure, they don't like it, of course,
yeah.
But I have heard that now y'all tell me, because y'all know better, that the domesticated, I call it domesticated lantana that we see in the nurseries, is not as poisonous, and maybe not even have much of a poisonous effect as the wild lantana does. Is that true?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, but well, what I'm referring to is people love to let the invasive, the Lantana camara, oh, look at all the butterflies it's bringing. It can't be a problem if it's bringing all these butterflies. It must be a good thing. And
Right.
not
Well, let me tell
seeing,
you another one that's a huge problem is that coral ardesia. Have you, it's got
yeah.
those red berries.
Yep.
Well, it's what's happening is it's getting, those berries are getting in the rivers and streams. They're ending up in a lot of the wet and low-lying areas, especially over toward Seminole and Orange County. And then the cows, they graze, and in the wintertime, those berries, it is killed cows just eating mouthfuls of those berries.
Wow, I wasn't aware of that. I know that
It is bad.
it's
And
invasive here, and it does very well in shady areas.
yes,
So once it gets into a forest, or especially a damp forest area, it spreads very quickly.
yes. I know some cattlemen over there that go in those low areas in the woods, and they will go in there and they will hand pull and try to protect and keep those berries from falling to remove them because it's that bad. It is so bad. And you can't kill it because that waxy leaf, you cannot kill it. You have to almost physically remove it.
Yeah, I know in a lot of areas it's kind of taken the place of air potato vine, because in the past they used to have air potato roundups every year and people would go out in the woods and the parks and pull up the air potato. But now with the release of the biological control beetles,
Right.
it's not as big of a problem, and it doesn't make anywhere near as many of the potatoes that if they fall off, they start a whole new plant. So they've kind of transitioned to going out, pulling up coral ardesia in the woods and the parks in the same areas.
Took up a niche.
So there's always something to pull up in
Yes.
the woods. And going back to horses real quick, I know that they can get bored. I was contacted by a lady who has several horses in a pasture, and she had a very large live oak. And the horse started chewing on the trunk and the buttress roots and damaged them very, very badly on one side of the tree. And the foliage at the very top of the tree on that side was starting to die, which meant that there was root or trunk damage. The tree wasn't able to move water all the way up to the very top anymore. I said, no, the horse is doing it. She had to cover it with chicken wire to keep the horse from chewing on it. So,
Wow.
So they get bored and they chew. And if there's something out there that's bad for them, they may get into it. So, okay, for any of our participants watching today, if any of you have any questions, if you look at the very bottom of your screen where it says chat, you can click on chat and go ahead and type in your questions right there. I don't see any questions here just yet. We have a couple of our regulars on here today. Let's see who's on here.
Bernie
Good
and
morning,
Sue.
Teresa. How are you? I see Teresa's on here.
Bernie and Sue are on here.
Yes, I see them. Carol's on here also. She's become a regular. Well, thank you very much, everybody. We really appreciate all the regular participants here and the regular stream of questions. And you know that if you have a question during the week or before Thursday morning, if you email it to me, and my email is wlester@ufl.edu, I can go ahead and put the pictures online here, and we'll get your question answered if we're able to. And of course, if I can't answer it, I make Lily answer it. If Lily can't answer it, then we send it off to somebody who can answer it at the university. So we'll get you an answer one way or the other. It might not be right away. If it's a livestock question, Laura will get it.
I send plenty to Bill. If they want to start talking vegetables, they get Bill's email.
Yeah, on occasion, these questions kind of make the grand circuit where Lily sends them to me and I send them to somebody, and they kind of circle around.
Or sometimes we just get each other's opinions too. So am I right about that?
It becomes almost like a poll question. What do you think this plant is? Well, I think it's this. I don't know. It might be this. And then we send it to Laura to get the real answer.
Well, I've been getting a lot of comments lately since we can't call it really invasive because it's a native, but a lot of complaints about greenbrier.
Oh,
And yeah, it's growing a lot right now. You have anything to say or any advice on that? Cat's claw is the other name of it.
Yeah, it's kind of tough because it does have little thorns that you don't notice until you're trying to pull the vines out and they tear your hands up.
Yep, and massive tubers too.
Yeah, and their roots, I've dug up some and I've seen pictures of them. I mean, they're like football size or larger, the very, very old plants. And I looked them up once before. There's about a dozen different species here in Florida, all very, very slightly different leaves. So they're pretty easy to identify by the leaves. And some are native and some are either invasive or introduced. They're not native. They're not, I don't know of any varieties that are a major invasive problem. But of course, they get under your hedges and start growing there, which makes them really, really difficult to get to and remove.
Yeah.
They have thorns.
I have some in my Yukon hollies.
Yeah, I have them in my hollies out front, along with Virginia creeper, along with a whole bunch of skunk vine. So I have all kinds of stuff growing up through my hedges too. And people ask what kind of chemical controls there are. There's nothing that works well that's not going to kill the hedge also. So there's plenty of things that'll kill the vines, but they're going to kill the hedge too.
And they'll just kill the vines. They won't kill the roots. The
Yeah,
vines
they
will be
only
back.
kill the above ground part. Now, a little tip or trick with any kind of vine that's in an open area that you do want to spray with glyphosate or triclopyr or whatever it might be. If you spray it in the fall, vines that come from a large tuber in the fall are moving nutrients from the leaves into the tuber. So if you spray with an herbicide then, they're going to move the herbicide into the tuber. And you have a good chance, if you spray them correctly at the right rate, to get enough herbicide into the tuber to kill it. Doesn't always work, but that's when you
still
have
could damage your hedges that they're on.
Pardon me?
So you still could damage their hedges then.
Sure, if you do that and it's growing through your hedges, you're going to kill your hedges too.
Yeah.
That's not a very good plan for growing in a hedge. But if you had, let's say, air potato vine or greenbrier growing all by itself on a fence you wanted to get rid of, spraying it with an herbicide in the fall is going to give you the best chance of getting the herbicide into the tuber, and that's what you need to do to kill it.
Does it have any properties for wildlife? Like good
I don't
properties?
know. I know a lot of them do flower and they get little berries, and the berries are going to be consumed by wildlife. That's how it spreads.
Right.
You know, birds that eat berries go and poop somewhere else and plant the seed somewhere else, and all of a sudden, you know, Lily has it in her yard where she never had it before. She's like, how on earth did it get here? Well, birds brought it.
Yeah.
I have invasive lantana growing out of one of my palm trees, which was, the seed was brought to me by a bird. So it ate the lantana berries in somebody else's yard, brought it and planted it in the boots in my palm tree. So,
which is, you know, a good thing to point out that when we talk about invasives, so many people are like, well, I like this plant and I keep it controlled in my pot, or, you know, or in this little piece of land. It doesn't go anywhere else. You don't know that. You can't control the birds or the wind.
yeah, especially if it flowers and it makes some kind of berry that's consumed by either birds or some other kind of wildlife, that means the seeds are getting moved to somebody else's yard, or even worse, to a wooded area or a natural area or a park area. So that's how these things get around, and that's why they become such a huge problem. Okay, we have a question here. This looks like a good Lily question.
Oh,
so this is from Carol. She said, we planted pentas and I like to keep them compact. Can I trim at any time, or is there a right time for trimming pentas?
I'm not even sure. I know they can get leggy as the season goes on. I really don't know that answer about it. Probably depends on the variety of Penta. You've got a master gardener hanging around out here, one of them or two of them. One of them might know the answer to that if they've had that question before. I mean, it's a good, once the rains start again, summer you can prune just about anything, I would think, in general.
Yes, and Pentas are apparently a very good choice, because we just had a webinar with a guest speaker on pollinators. And one of the best plants they found for pollinators and native bees and butterflies in general is Pentas. So Pentas are very highly sought out by pollinators and butterflies. And Pentas grow as a perennial, so they're going to grow year round. They get knocked back and frozen, and they look, pretty rough over the winter if we get, really cold spells. But Pentas, you pretty much trim them back a little bit anytime to keep them a little bit more compact. There is no specific time when you want to trim them. Like
just
perennial flowering shrubs,
yeah.
You want to try to keep that to just once a year, and you want to do that in the very, very early spring. Pentas, you're safe to trim them anytime. And we got a question from Ronald about, what about the native lantana berries? And that's a very good question, because lantanas do flower. And I know the invasive one does set berries, little black berries that birds eat. The native one, if it sets berries, it's native, so it's just fine if birds want to plant that all over the place. And we do have a native lantana that's native to this part of Florida. It grows in high, dry, sandy pine tree areas, does very well, has a light, like a pale yellow flower.
Yeah, it's not the multicolored like the invasive.
Yeah, the invasive one is the one that gets a little yellow and like light purple and orange, just multicolored flowers.
The trailing Monteverde, the trailing light purple one, used to be considered okay, but I think they're looking at it now for its invasive properties as well.
Yeah, I've never honestly seen the domesticated landscape ones that you would purchase at a big box store or a nursery. I've never seen them pop up magically where they weren't planted. But I have seen the invasive one pop up all over the place.
Oh yeah.
We can go into a Florida state park area and walk 5 miles into the woods and look down and find an invasive lantana.
And the butterflies will be all over it.
Sure, the butterflies don't care. They like it.
And so people think that makes it okay, but you've got to look at the bigger picture.
Yeah, they are highly invasive, and they do pop up all over the place. But I've honestly never seen the domesticated ones pop up where they shouldn't be. But University of Florida has a department that constantly is reevaluating all different plants to see if they are invasive or maybe if they've become invasive. Because if you think about if we introduce a new landscape plant and only a few people have it, maybe it's fine. It's not in the woods yet. It doesn't seem invasive. But over time, if more and more people plant it, if it's the kind of plant that flowers and sets viable seed, maybe berries, maybe birds start moving it all over the place, they can become invasive down the road, whereas 5 years ago, they weren't really invasive. So University of Florida is always reevaluating these things to see if maybe they become invasive, whereas 5 years ago, when you put one in your yard, it wasn't. Maybe now it is. So things change.
Maybe Teresa can, if she's back there, can do her magic and look for the Edith's Pub on Pentas or some kind of, I'm thinking if you want compact, you might want to stick with a compact variety of Pentas might be your answer for that. But maybe she can find that for us. She's good at that.
Yeah, Pentas can get leggy.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay. Carol said that I trimmed about 2 months ago. I assume the pentas still, and the buds look like dry brown cluster, not flowering presently. You want to make sure the flower buds, if something happened, the stem was damaged, the plant got too dry, and the flower buds have died, you really want to make sure that they are dead and brown before you trim them off. With pentas and many other plants, if you keep the spent flowers trimmed off, it's going to force the plant to flower a lot more. So that's kind of a little trick to get your flowering plants to put out even more flowers. And Ronald said he sent a picture of his palm frond with the black coating after last week's meeting. Were you able to determine the problem? I'm not sure if I got that picture or not. If you want to send it to me again today, I promise that I'll look at it, and if it's a pretty easy to answer question, I'll get back with you. We don't have, palm trees can get a variety of problems, but the list is pretty limited. So the number of issues that commonly happen with palms is usually pretty easy to diagnose from a picture, but not always. So Ronald, if you want to go ahead and send me that picture again, I'll go ahead and look at that and get back with you. And Teresa's already put a link to pentas on here. So for Carol, if you click on that, that's going to give you University of Florida information for pentas. And Laura put up the creeping indigo documents. So gosh, look at all these people. They're so much better than I am at this.
We're snazzy.
Yeah, you are. You're getting pretty good at this Zoom stuff here.
Well, I'm looking at some UF information about pentas, and at least this one mentions that they're going to be 2 to 3 feet tall. So there just might not be, you know, if that's the height they want to be, cutting them back they might not get a good reaction. But I don't know if there's such a thing as dwarf pentas out there.
There probably are. I mean, there's a lot of different varieties. There's different flower colors. The people who raise landscape material are always looking at new varieties and, you know, with new attributes that are, you know, more primarily disease resistant, get new colors, flower more profusely. So.
And I really wouldn't be doing much of any pruning or anything right now until those summer rains start up like they should, because it's so hot and dry, and you're going to stress your plants even more if you do anything to them right now.
Yeah, that's a very good point. When we're not officially in a drought right now, but my yard has been very dry.
Yeah. So
you want to try to postpone most of your pruning. You want to cut your grass as infrequently as you can. You want to cut it as high as you can. Your grass is going to be looking a little dried out and wilted, especially if you don't have an irrigation system. You really want to try to not fertilize your lawn right now because of exactly how dry it is.
Teresa's telling us about the dwarf. She copied the information. So the dwarf ones are going to get to be 18 inches even, but they're saying the old-fashioned ones that haven't been hybridized are really the most attractive to the butterflies and hummingbirds. That's usually the case. The more that people mess with the flowers, the less that wildlife recognizes it as a flower.
Okay, through the wonders of technology, Ronald resent me the picture of his European fan palm, and it does have a black coating of some of the lower palm fronds. What that almost looks like is sooty mold, which you don't see very often on palm trees, but it obviously can happen. So when you get a chance, if you could look at the fronds, the top side, the underside, the stems on the fronds, and see if you see any scale insects or any other small insects feeding on it. what happens is, and I guess the one you would most commonly see on a palm tree would be a species of scale. If certain scales feed on your plants, what they do is they poop a sugary substance on it that gets on the lower leaves, and then a fungus grows in it that's called sooty mold. That's that black stuff. If you go out there with your fingers, you can actually rub it off. You could, it doesn't usually wash off with just water, but if you spray with an oil spray and then hose it off with a garden hose, you could get that black off. But in that case, the black substance isn't your problem. Your problem is the insects that are feeding on your palm and pooping on it and creating that black substance. So if you can go ahead when you get a chance to check for any small insects, and I work for somebody who is really an expert on palms, so I'll go ahead and send it off to him and see what he thinks that it might be also. So we will get you an answer to that.
Jim loves palms.
Yes, he does. Our county extension director, Jim Davis, really loves palms, and I'll send that picture to him. So see how I mentioned earlier, sometimes pictures and questions make the whole circle here? Yours will, but we'll get an answer for you. So I don't really see any other questions on here. If anybody does have a last minute question or comment, I think we covered pentas pretty well, and how wonderful horses are pretty well, and creeping indigo. And Ronald asked one final question here. Can you spray in this heat? And that is a very good question about what, because it is hot now and it is very, very sunny during the day, what you can apply and what you don't want to apply. So the list of things, just as a general rule, you don't want to be applying when it's very, very hot and sunny. Any kind of herbicides to your lawn, because any kind of weed and feed, which we don't recommend to begin with, or weed killer in your lawn, if you read the label on that, it probably says somewhere, do not apply this when the daily temperature is above 90. The heat index I saw this morning might be hitting about 110. So you go by the temperature and the heat index also. So if you go out there and start applying herbicides to your lawn right now, you run a definite risk of killing your entire lawn because it's just too hot. Any kind of oil sprays or something that contains an oil, so horticultural oil, I know a lot of people really like to use neem oil as a pest control. That is an oil. If you spray them when it's very, very sunny, you may basically fry your plants. So your plants are going to basically sunburn. The oil concentrates the sun's rays on the surface of the leaf, and you're going to burn the leaf. So be very, very careful with applying any kind of oils. What you can spray right now is insecticidal soap, which is a very good pest control for a variety of small soft-biting insects, things like aphids, spider mites, scales. But if Ronald, if you were going to use any kind of oil, you probably want to be very, very careful with applying that. You can use oils now if your palm tree is in a partly shady spot. If you go out there and spray it either very, very early in the morning, or I probably wait until evening just before dark. That way you can spray an oil and it's going to have all night long to totally dry and dissipate on the leaves. As a general rule, if you're hesitant or you're a little nervous about, is this oil going to hurt my plant or not? You can go out and spray just a little bit of the plant and wait a day or so and see if it has a bad reaction or not. If it doesn't, it's probably pretty safe to spray. So taking those kind of precautions this time of year is a really good idea with a palm tree, your lawn, anything you have out in the yard. Because I did an internship for a small farm once before, and it was the heat of summer, and he was growing Asian yard lawn beans. They get about 1.5 feet. They don't get a yard long, they get about 1.5 feet long. And he had trellised area just covered with yard lawn beans and sprayed it with neem oil for the aphids, and he fried them. It looked like he hit them with a flamethrower. They grew back. It didn't kill them, but he knocked about 2 or 3 weeks off from the plants having to recover, regrow new foliage, get new flowers, get new beans. So he was a little upset about that. And he knew as soon as he did it that he made a mistake. So don't make that mistake. So I think that's about all the different questions that we have here for today. So I guess with that, we'll go ahead and wrap it up. Laura, anything else you want to add?
Oh, no, but anytime.
Okay, great. Yeah, we'll definitely have to have you come back and talk a little bit more about horses and maybe goats next time.
You're going to tell them
Goats, or you
about
can
our
answer
compost?
rabbit questions. We get rabbit questions every once in a while.
Oh, yes. And like Lily said, we're doing compost next week, right?
Yeah.
Yes, we are. I forgot to compost. All three of us are going to be on Zoom once again next Tuesday for
Yes.
a compost class. So everybody, please be sure to tune in for that.
It's
All
a
the information
binless.
on our Facebook page. If you go to hernandoextension.com, that is a complete listing of all of our upcoming classes, and that will have the Zoom link on there that you can click on and join us next Tuesday at 10 a.m. Is that correct, Lily?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yeah, and we'll talk about composting. Bill will talk about the science, and me, that's Dr. Bill. Down to Earth Lil will interpret what he just said. And since we get a lot of questions about compost and manure, that's why we brought Laura in to talk crap for us at this compost.
Yes.
Yes,
and the safety
really
and how to
careful
use
do
it
that
and
correctly.
Yes.
Yes, because I'm the one who has to kind of poo-poo the whole thing and point out the possible food safety issues with using raw manure. But we'll cover all that on Tuesday. So join us for another fun Zoom-filled morning next Tuesday.
And next Wednesday, I have a class about lawns, everything you always wanted to know about your Florida lawn. And we're going to change it to a Zoom class because I had, a horrendous incident yesterday on Facebook Live. We had a spammer. It was pretty horrible.
No.
So I'm going to be locking down a bunch of my classes. So that will be a Zoom class, and the link will be available as well on the event. But everything you wanted to know about lawns.
Of course, the information for that and the link is also on HernandoExtension, all one word, .com.
And the link isn't there yet. Give me about a half an hour.
Okay, the link is coming. So, yes. Okay, well, great. Thank you very much, everybody.
Yes, thank you.